A man stands at the edge of a slow brown canal, hundreds of miles from the only home he has ever known. His name is Ezekiel. He was a priest once. He was trained to serve in a temple he can no longer see, in a city he may never walk again. The water in front of him is not the water of home. The language in the marketplace behind him is not his language. He is a long way from where he is supposed to be. And then the sky opens. What he sees, he can barely put into words. Wheels inside of wheels. Fire that folds in on itself. Faces. And above all of it, a brightness with weight to it. A presence so heavy it presses him flat to the ground. The Hebrew word for that brightness is kavod. We usually translate it glory, but the root of the word means something simpler and stranger. It means weight, heaviness, the sheer pressing down reality of God being in the room. And in his vision, Ezekiel watches that weight do something no one ever expected it to do. It moves. The glory of God lifts off the temple back in Jerusalem. It rises to the doorway. It pauses at the threshold, the way you pause in a doorway when you are leaving a house for the last time. And then it drifts east, out the door, out of the city, gone. Stay with that image, because it raises a question that hangs over everything that comes next. When God walks out of his own house, does he ever walk back in? Hold on to that question. We are going to come back to it. Now, most people, when they open the back half of the Old Testament, find 4 enormous books sitting there in a row. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. 4 prophets, 4 hard names. 4 books most people start and quietly give up on somewhere around chapter 10. And almost everyone reads them the same way, as 4 separate men shouting 4 separate warnings into 4 separate centuries. Here is what most people miss. They are not 4 warnings. Read them in order, and they line up into one single story. One nation walked across the worst 100 years of its entire life. Isaiah is the warning before the fall. Jeremiah is the fall itself, the city burning. Ezekiel is the exile, life in a foreign land. And Daniel is the long, slow wait inside an empire that looks like it will never end. This is not a story about 4 books. This is not a story about predictions. This is not a story about doom. This is a story about a home being lost and a promise whispered the whole way down that it would one day be given back. So let's go back to the beginning, back before the fire. Back to a year when Jerusalem was still standing, the temple was still full, and everything looked completely fine. That, as it turns out, was the most dangerous moment of all. Set the clock back about 150 years before Ezekiel ever saw that canal. It is the 8th century before Christ. Jerusalem is alive. The markets are loud. The temple is busy. The harvests are coming in. If you walked the streets in those years, you would not feel like a nation on the edge of anything. You would feel safe, comfortable, maybe a little proud. And that is exactly the problem. Into that comfortable city walks a man named Isaiah, and the way his story starts tells you everything about what kind of book this is going to be. Because Isaiah does not begin with a sermon. He begins with a vision that nearly kills him. He is in the temple, and suddenly the room is too small for what is in it. He sees the Lord, high and lifted up, and the edges of his robe alone fill the entire building. Above him are burning creatures, seraphim, and they are calling to one another with a single word, over and over, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. We translate it, holy, holy, holy. But the word Kadosh does not mean very nice or very religious. It means set apart, other. So completely different from everything you have ever known that you do not have a category for it. And they say it 3 times, which in Hebrew is how you turn the volume all the way up. Not holy, not very holy, the holiest, off the scale. And Isaiah, a good man, a religious man, a man who probably thought he was doing fine, takes one look and falls apart. Woe is me, he says. I am undone. He is not being dramatic. He is standing in the presence of pure weight, the kavod again, and he suddenly sees himself clearly for the first time in his life. And here is the part nobody tells you about that scene. God does not leave him on the floor. A burning coal is taken from the altar and touched to his lips, and his guilt is carried away. And then a voice asks a question to the whole room. Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And this broken man, who 30 seconds ago thought he was finished, lifts his head and says 6 words, "Here am I. Send me." That is how the warning begins. Not with a confident preacher, with a man who has been wrecked and then rebuilt, and then handed a message he knows almost nobody wants to hear. And what was the message? Trouble is coming. From the north. The comfort you are sitting in is borrowed time. The nation has drifted. The powerful are crushing the poor. The worship has become a performance, and judgment is on its way. Isaiah says it for years. He says it to kings. He says it in the streets. And for the most part, people do exactly what you would do if a man told you the roof was going to fall in on a sunny afternoon. They ignore him. But here is where it gets remarkable. If Isaiah were only a book of warnings, it would be heavy, but it would be simple. It is not simple, because running right alongside the warning is a second note, quieter, stranger, almost out of place. In the middle of all the judgment, Isaiah keeps describing someone, a servant, a man who would be despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, someone who would be wounded, the book says, not for his own wrongs, but for everyone else's. Nobody listening could have fully understood it yet. A suffering servant in the middle of a book about a coming kingdom? Hold that thought. We are going to need it before the end. And then, almost exactly at the center of the book, Isaiah turns a corner so sharply you can feel it. After chapter on chapter of warning, the tone changes in a single line. Comfort ye, my people, saith your God. Read that again and notice what it assumes. You do not say comfort to people who are fine. You say it to people who are already in pain. Isaiah is speaking past the disaster that has not even happened yet, speaking to a people who will one day be sitting in the rubble. And the first thing God tells those future grieving people is not, "I told you so." It is comfort, my people. So feel the shape of this first book, because it is the shape of the whole story you are about to hear. Warning, yes. Judgment, yes. But underneath it, from the very start, a promise leaning forward into the dark. A servant who would suffer. A comfort prepared before the wound even lands. Isaiah saw the storm coming. He told everyone, and almost no one listened. So the storm came. So that's the first chapter of the story. The warning. A nation told for decades exactly what was coming, and a nation that decided it would rather not hear it. If you're following the thread this far, do me one favor. Hit subscribe, because the next 3 chapters are where this whole thing comes together. And while you're down there, tell me one thing in the comments. Of these 4 prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, how many have you actually read all the way through? Be honest, I won't judge. Now, the storm. The storm came in the shape of a man named Jeremiah. And of all 4 prophets, he is the one I want you to actually picture, because his life was the saddest of the 4. They call him the weeping prophet, and he earned the name. When God first calls him, Jeremiah does almost exactly what Isaiah did not do. He argues. "Ah, Lord God," he says, "I cannot speak. I am a child." He was young, probably a teenager, from a small priestly family in a town called Anathoth, just outside Jerusalem. And he is told that his entire job for the rest of his life will be to stand in front of his own people and tell them the disaster Isaiah warned about is now at the door. Imagine that. Imagine being handed, as a teenager, a message that will cost you every friend you have and make you the most hated man in your own city. And then imagine being right. Because here is something most people don't know. We are not guessing about how bad those final years were. We have the letters. In modern times, archaeologists digging at a fortress town called Lachish, southwest of Jerusalem, found pottery shards with writing still on them. Field messages scratched out in the last few weeks before everything fell, and one of them is almost unbearable to read. A soldier writes back to his commander that he is watching for the fire signals from the nearby towns, the way he was ordered to, and then he says, quietly, he can no longer see the signals from one of the towns. The fire had gone dark. That is not a sermon. That is a real man standing on a real wall, watching the lights of his own country go out one by one. That is the world Jeremiah was preaching into. And how did the people thank him for the warning? They threw him down a cistern. There is a moment in his book where his enemies take him and lower him by ropes into an empty water pit. There is no water left in it, only mud. And the text says he sank down into the mire. Picture a man up to his waist in cold mud at the bottom of a stone shaft, in the dark, left there to die for the crime of telling the truth nobody wanted. But it gets worse than one man in a pit. In the year 586 before Christ, the warning finally fully came true. The Babylonian army broke through, the walls came down, the city burned, and the temple, the house where the kavod, the weight of God, had lived, was torn apart and set on fire. Everything Isaiah saw coming, everything Jeremiah wept over, happened in a matter of weeks. The home was gone. And this is where it gets remarkable, because even here, even in the most broken book written by the most broken-hearted man, there is a line that does not belong to the darkness. Right in the middle of Jeremiah, God makes a promise. "Behold, the days come," he says, "that I will make a new covenant, not a repaired old one, a new one." A relationship written not on stone tablets that can be smashed, but on the inside of people where no army can burn it. In the very book where the temple falls, God promises something the temple could never give. Plant that line in your memory. A new covenant. We will see who carries it. Now, the fire is over. The survivors are gone, marched off in chains 1,000 miles east to Babylon. And that is exactly where we left a younger priest at the very beginning of this story, Ezekiel. Remember him? The man by the canal who watched the glory leave. He was part of that deported crowd, and his whole strange book is written from inside the exile. Not before the fall like Isaiah, not during it like Jeremiah, but after, in a foreign country, among people who have lost absolutely everything and are starting to believe God has lost them too. His visions are the wildest in the Bible. Wheels within wheels, turning in every direction at once, covered in eyes. A throne of fire moving on the wind. People have argued for centuries about what exactly he saw, but you do not need a diagram to feel the point. To a people who thought God was trapped in a temple in Jerusalem and therefore lost when that temple burned, Ezekiel says, no, the throne has wheels. He is not stuck. He followed you here. He is in Babylon too. And then comes the vision that I think is the emotional center of all 4 books. God sets Ezekiel down in the middle of a valley, and the valley is full of bones. Not fresh bodies, old bones, dry bones, bleached white in the sun. A whole army, long dead, scattered across the ground. And God asks him a question that is really being asked of the entire exiled nation. Son of man, can these bones live? Look at what that question is really saying. The nation was not just defeated, it was dead as a field of dry bones, homeless, templeless, kingless, scattered. There was no human way back. And into that, God does not say, cheer up. He tells Ezekiel to speak to the bones. And as he speaks, there is a noise, a rattling, and the bones come together, bone to bone. Sinew grows, skin covers them, and then breath enters them, and a valley of corpses stands up, a living army, where a moment ago there was only dust. It is the single most hopeful image in books that are mostly about grief, and it is making a promise so big the exiles could barely hold it. The death of this nation is not the end of this nation. What looks like a graveyard is going to be a resurrection. So feel where we are now in the story. Isaiah warned, Jeremiah wept as it all burned, and now Ezekiel, sitting in the ashes of exile, is being handed the first real word of hope. Not that the disaster would be undone, but that something would be raised up out of it. But there was still one piece missing, because hope is easy to feel in a vision. It is a very different thing to live faithfully year after year in an empire that owns you and looks like it will rule forever. For that, we need the last prophet. His name is Daniel. And quick thing before we get to him, if this video is connecting the dots for you, the subscribe button is right there. It genuinely helps. Now, Daniel was a teenager too, like Jeremiah, but his problem was the opposite one. Jeremiah's whole life was spent watching home fall apart. Daniel never really had a home to begin with. He was taken in the very first wave of captives, hauled off to Babylon as a boy, given a new name, fed at the king's table, and trained to serve the empire that had destroyed his country. And the question his whole book is quietly asking is one you may know better than you think. How do you stay yourself when everything around you wants to make you somebody else? That is the question of exile, and it is the most modern thing in all 4 books. Because most of us know, in some small way, what it feels like to be far from where we belong, to live somewhere that runs on values that are not ours, to carry a home inside us, a place, a faith, a version of ourselves that the world around us keeps pressing on, asking us to quietly let go of. That ache has a name. It is homesickness, and Daniel lived in it for 70 years, and he does not survive it by escaping. He survives it by refusing to bend on the small things and the large ones, and the most famous picture of that refusal is the one you learned as a child, though you may have forgotten how dark it really is. Daniel is an old man by then, decades into the exile, serving yet another king. He is so good at his job that jealous officials cannot find a single thing to accuse him of, so they build a trap out of the one thing they know he will never give up. They get the king to sign a law. For 30 days, you may pray to no one but the king. And Daniel, who could have prayed quietly, who could have closed his window and kept his head down and stayed alive, goes home, opens the window toward Jerusalem, the home he has not seen in 60 years, and kneels down and prays the way he always has, in full view, knowing exactly what it will cost. They throw him to the lions, and a king who never meant to hurt him spends a sleepless night and runs to the pit at dawn and calls down into the dark, and Daniel answers, alive, the mouths of the lions shut. Because here is the thing about exile that Daniel understood and his enemies did not. You can take a man's country, you can take his temple, his language, his name, but you cannot make him bow if he has already decided who he kneels to. And he was not the only one. 3 of his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are ordered to bow to a golden statue, and they will not. And they are thrown into a furnace heated so hot it kills the guards who carry them. And the king looks in and counts and panics, because he threw 3 men into the fire, and he sees 4. A 4th figure, walking in the flames, unburned, and the king says he looks like a son of the gods. They walk out without so much as the smell of smoke on them. Pay attention to that 4th figure. We are almost there. And there is the night a different king, Belshazzar, throws a drunken party using the sacred cups stolen from the burned temple in Jerusalem. And a human hand appears and writes 4 words on the plaster wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, numbered, weighed, divided. Daniel reads it. Your kingdom has been weighed in the balance and found wanting. That very night, the empire that looked eternal falls. Babylon, the great unstoppable power, gone before morning. Hold that, because it is the answer to a fear every exile carries. The empire is not actually forever. The thing that conquered you is itself on a clock. Long before any of that, when Daniel was still a young man, the king Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that terrified him, and only Daniel could tell him what it meant. The king had seen an enormous statue. Its head was gold, its chest was silver, its middle bronze, its legs iron, its feet a brittle mix of iron and clay. And while the king watched, a stone was cut out of a mountain, but not by any human hand. And it struck the statue at the feet, and the whole towering thing came down. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, all of it crushed to dust and blown away like chaff. And the stone grew into a mountain that filled the entire earth. Daniel told him what it meant. The statue was empires, yours and the ones that will come after you, each one heavier and harsher than the last. They will rise, they will look permanent, and every single one of them will fall. But the stone, the kingdom not cut by human hands, that one never ends. A boy in chains, standing in a foreign court, told the most powerful man on earth that his empire was a statue waiting to fall, and that a kingdom no human built was coming to outlast them all. Keep that stone in mind, because Daniel was about to see it again. And then Daniel has a vision of his own, and it is the key that unlocks all 4 books at once. He sees kingdoms rise and fall, like beasts coming up out of the sea. And then he sees one more figure come, but this one does not come up out of the chaos. This one comes down with the clouds of heaven, and the book describes him with 2 words, and here is the strange detail. Most of the Old Testament is in Hebrew, but this section of Daniel is written in Aramaic, the language of the empire itself. And in the empire's own tongue, the figure is called Bar-Enash, son of man. To this one, Daniel says, was given a kingdom that will never be destroyed and never pass away, not numbered, not weighed and found wanting, not divided. The one kingdom that outlasts every empire, the stone that fills the earth. Now pull the threads together. Remember the servant Isaiah saw, the man of sorrows, wounded for other people? Remember the new covenant Jeremiah promised, written on the inside of people instead of on stone? A suffering servant, a new covenant, a son of man with an everlasting kingdom. 4 prophets across 200 years and 3 empires, each handed one piece of a description they could not fully understand, of someone who had not come yet. And that brings us back to the door. Remember where we started. Ezekiel, by the canal, watching the weight of God, the kavod, rise off the temple, pause at the threshold, and walk east out of the city. We asked a question and then left it hanging. When God walks out of his own house, does he ever walk back in? Here is the answer Ezekiel was given. Near the end of his book, he sees a new temple. And as he watches, the glory of God returns. And the text is very specific about the direction. It comes from the way of the east, the exact direction it left by. The same weight, the same presence, coming back through the same door it walked out of. The glory that left is the glory that returns. And it does not come back smaller or weaker or ashamed. It comes back to fill the house. That is the secret hiding in all 4 books. The story was never really about the falling. The falling was real. The fire was real. The exile was real. The grief was real. But underneath the whole thing, from Isaiah's first warning to Ezekiel's last vision, God was telling one stubborn promise in 4 installments. I am not done. The home is not lost forever. The glory walks back in. So let me give it back to you simply before you go. These 4 books are not 4 warnings. They are not 4 men shouting into 4 empty centuries. They are not 4 endings. They are one story, told in 4 voices, about a home that was lost and a God who refused to let that be the last word. Here are the 3 things I want you to walk away with. The first is the simplest. Read them in order, and the shape appears. Isaiah is the warning. Jeremiah is the collapse. Ezekiel is the exile. Daniel is the long wait. And the whole time, in every single one of them, the story is leaning in one direction, away from the fire and toward the return. You will never read these 4 the same way again once you have seen that line running through them. The second is closer to home. You are probably standing in one of those 4 chapters right now. Maybe you are in an Isaiah season and something in your life is warning you and you are deciding whether to listen. Maybe you are in the collapse like Jeremiah, watching something you loved come down. Maybe you are in exile, far from where you belong, trying like Daniel just to stay yourself. The prophets are not ancient strangers. They are people who lived where you are living now. And the third one is the one I cannot stop thinking about. The glory that leaves is the glory that comes back. The weight of God walked out of that temple. east, out the door, and the entire rest of the story is him walking back in, through the same door, in the same direction, and he never came back smaller. Whatever has walked out of your house, your hope, your faith, the version of your life you thought you had lost, the deep promise buried under all four of these books is that with God, the leaving is never the end of the story. The glory walks back in. So here is my question for you, and I really do want your answer. Of those four chapters, the warning, the collapse, the exile, the wait, which one are you standing in right now? Tell me below. I read them. 4 books, 4 prophets, 1 story. And it was never, for one moment, about the falling. It was always about the coming back.